today, and I'll be making this rail fence quilt block. It's a 12.5-inch block. Will finish in your quilt at 12 inches. And it's a strip piece block, very, very simple, perfect for a beginner quilter. So let's get started. I'll show you how to make it. You'll need to choose 3 coordinating fabrics. From each of your 3 fabrics, cut 1 2.5-inch strip by the width of the fabric. Now, if you can tell, I'm using fat quarters today, so for one of my blocks, I would be cutting 2 strips 2.5 inches by the length of my fat quarter, which is about 22 inches. I'll cut my 2.5-inch strips out of 2 fabrics at the same time. I'll just line them up. I'll trim the right side off to make it nice and even. And all I'm doing is lining up with the line on my ruler at the fold. And I'll use my rotary cutter and just trim the right side off so it's nice and even. I'll carefully flip that over. I'll use my ruler again and I'll line up this edge at my 2.5-inch mark and cut. And I don't have quite enough left here on my end for another strip, but that's okay because I previously cut my strips ahead of time, so I have plenty for my block. And I'll repeat that with my 3rd fabric. My ends are nice and matched up, so I will just simply flip it around. Line up at the 2.5-inch mark here, and then my line on my ruler on the fold, and cut. And again, I have my other strips that I previously cut, so I'm all ready to sew my strips together. Here's a strip set that I previously sewed together. So what I want to do with this set, since it's going to be for the same block, I want to make sure these are in the same order. So I'll start with my white and pink, and then the green and the pink. And it'll be right sides together. I'll do the first 2. And I always like to sew beginning at the selvage end. So I just line those up. And you can see how with these fat quarters, they're different lengths. That's normal. They're never the same length. So I'll take it to the machine. I'll sew a 1/4 inch, actually a scant 1/4 inch seam all the way down. I have my 1/4 inch presser foot. I will move my needle over just a thread's distance, and that'll help me create my seam allowance, my scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'll use my leader fabric. I'll clip off my leader fabric and reposition it. You can see I've been using it a lot. With my 3rd strip, I still want to line up my selvage edges like so, but I'm actually going to sew from the opposite end. And I'll press this after I've sewn all 3 on. So again, how I mentioned before, the ends aren't going to meet, but that's okay because we'll trim that later. And I'll just flip it around and sew from this end. And that helps to keep your strip sets from bowing out too much and getting distorted. So I'll sew from this end right here. Now, since I have all 3 of the strips sewn together, I'll press, and I like to press these from the back. And I just kind of tug a little bit, not to distort it, but just to flatten it out. And I make sure and press both of my strip sets in the same direction. And then I'll just turn it over and press from the front. Make sure I didn't get any folds or anything in there. Now I'll cut my strip set into 6.5-inch segments, and I need 4 of those, which is why when you use fat quarters, you'll need 2 sets, because this is only about 22 inches long, and we need 4. So I will trim off, and I like to use my quilt in a day ruler for this part. I can see through it better, and I seem to get more accurate results. So I'll just even off my edge. Just as before, I'll flip that around. I'll line my edge up at the 6.5-inch mark and line this line up here. And if it's not exact, you can, what I sometimes do, because these strip sets can get a little wonky sometimes. So then what I would do is just trim it a little bit bigger than 6.5 inches and then come back and square it up. This one looks pretty good. And repeat that, and I should be able to get 2 more segments out of my 1 strip set from my fat quarters. This strip set in the center is a little wonky, as I will use that word. It's just a little off, so as I mentioned before, so what I'm doing is I'm cutting it a little bit larger than 6.5 inches. I have enough extra fabric here. And then I'll come back and I will square it up after I finish my next cut. And I think I'll do the same thing with this one. It looks a lot nicer, but just to show you. So just a little bit larger than 6.5. It looks good here and here. And so what I'll do is I'll just flip it around. Put it at exactly 6.5 inches, here and here. And I'll flip this one around. And you can also use these seam lines as a guide as well. Make sure they're nice and even, and they look really good. So I have this lined up and this lined up, so I have a little bit overhanging here and here, and I'll just trim both of those off. And now I know that that's perfectly 6.5 inches square. And that strip set gave me 3 6.5-inch squares, so I need 1 more, so I'll just use my next strip set. And repeat that same thing, even it off, and then cut off 6.5 inches square. And here's one of the sample blocks that I made earlier, and this is the layout that I chose. So I'll match that same layout with these new pieces of my block. And you can, I was just going to show you that you can arrange them in different ways. This is a little bit different, to get a little bit of a different look. I'll go ahead and arrange them the same way that I arranged them on this block. And now I can sew the block together, right sides together. I'll do the top portion and the bottom portion. And normally I would do this right next to my sewing machine so I wouldn't get confused. But I'll just put a pin, and that'll indicate which direction I'm sewing in. And I'll do the same thing here. I'll take it to the machine, a scant 1/4 inch seam right along here. And I'm just using here a stiletto that I really like. when I'm sewing, especially when I have a seam here that I need to just kind of press down. It's just kind of nice. And then I'll feed the next one in. Now when I press, I go ahead and put them in their proper positions, because now I'll want to press this seam allowance going one direction and the other seam allowance in the other direction, so they'll be easy to join together. Now I'll just give it a little finger press here. And this one I want to go in the opposite direction, so I'm going to flip it around. Set my seam. And then I'll put it in the proper direction. And so this seam is going this way, and this is going in the opposite. Now to join these two right sides together, and now I do need to match up this seam here and this seam here, and they should nestle up nicely. And you can use a pin here. I'm going to use this Sew Line glue stick. It's water soluble, it'll wash right out. And I'll just put a little dab right on the top. And then I'll nestle those together. And then I'll just give it a pinch. And then I'll just use a pin on each end. I'll take it to the machine, a scant 1/4 inch seam all the way down. And I'll give it a little peek and see how I did matching up my seams. And they look great. I'll take it over to the pressing area. I'll set my seam. Give it a little finger press. And I'll give it a final measure, just to ensure that it's 12.5 inches square. And it looks great. There you have it, the Rail Fence quilt block. A really simple quilt block and a lot of fun to make. I hope you give it a try. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.